let's reach some understanding here. We're going to be talking about the beliefs of religion and the attitudes of science. They're very different disciplines, but they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. They're both trying to figure out what's true and what's real. So there really can't be any disagreement between the two. Because if you're both looking for the truth, you got to come to the same conclusion. Because there's only one truth. But there's a different manner, a different attitude. For example, in Torah, what the Torah tells us is the final word. You either believe it or you don't. What science is trying to do is come to the conclusion through experiment, through research, and through logic. That can't be the final word, because as soon as you say this is the final word, you're not being logical anymore. You're being dogmatic. And that only applies to religion. We don't want to turn science into a religion. So the scientist, the good scientist, knows that no matter what argument I have today, tomorrow I'll have a better one. Science is always improving and growing. So you can't say, yesterday I discovered something and that's it. That's the final word. That's the fact. No, it's all part of the research. If you say this is it, this is the final conclusion, then you've killed science. There's no point in going and doing any more research if you're so sure you know the answer. So, science is human beings trying to figure out what the world is all about. The Torah is the Creator telling you what the world is all about. Let me give you a good example. You walk into a room and there's a desk sitting in the middle of the room. Now you're trying to figure out, how did the desk get there? Was it always there? Was it built, put together, right there in that room from pieces? You have all sorts of theories, possibilities of how the desk got there. And then some guy walks in and says, "Excuse me, this is my office. I bought the desk at Costco last week, Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon." Well, now you know, and you can put all your theories and guesswork away, because here's the guy who did it. So the Torah is telling you what God did when He created the world. It's not a theory. It's not research. It's not using human logic. It's giving you the final answer. Now the question is, can science, which means human beings, can human beings ever figure out what the Torah already tells us? Can we logically come to the same conclusion? Or are we going to go off in different directions? So now, let's discuss the whole thing. What does science actually say about the origins of the universe? Well, the scientists gave up on the origins. They don't talk about the origins of the universe anymore, because they just can't get there. So instead, we're talking about the age of the universe. We don't know how it started, but we think we know when it started. The theory is great. Maybe there was a Big Bang. Maybe there were some subatomic particles or some strange stuff that exploded into a world. Maybe. The theory still needs completing. There are still some holes in the theory. And at best, if there were no holes in the theory, it would be a perfect possibility. But nobody would say, this is for sure how it happened, because you can't. You can't know for sure. You can only say it could have happened this way. And even if it could have happened this way, maybe it didn't. Maybe God came and created it and didn't wait for it to happen. So, there really is no conflict between a good theory and a fact. Well, see, the idea is the same, but the mystery remains. The mystery is, how do you go from nothing to something? And whether you're doing it scientifically or you're doing it religiously, it's the same question. Because we both agree, science and Torah agree, the world started at a certain point. It didn't always exist. So if it wasn't, how did it become? That's a mystery. And we gave up on figuring out how. We're just trying to understand when. So, on the question of how old the universe is, science is starting with a big assumption. If the world came into existence in an embryonic state, how long would it take for it to become the condition that it's in today? And they're probably right. It would take billions of years. But that's on the assumption that the world was once embryonic, that the world was born like a baby. Started off tiny, and then it matured, and then it grew. The Torah says God created the world complete, old, finished. There was never an embryonic world. Like, for example, when Adam and Eve were created, they were never fetuses. They were never babies. They were never in diapers. They were created 20 years old on the day that they were created. So they were created adults. Trees were created with fruit, not seeds. So if Adam and Eve chopped down a tree, how many rings would they find in that tree? Maybe hundreds. But the tree is only 3 days old. So the world was created mature. If it had been created embryonic and had to age over time, then yes, it would have taken billions of years. But it didn't happen that way. And it's very logical. God created the world because he wanted to see something happen. He didn't want to sit and wait billions of years for the world to get ready. So he created the world complete. He didn't create babies, he created adults who could do something useful. He created trees with fruit. He created an earth with diamonds, with gas, with oil, because he wanted a complete world and wouldn't wait for it to mature on its own. You know what the real issue is? The real issue is that the scientists don't want to deal with a certain question. And they're going to have to deal with this question. Because if you don't deal with this question, you'll never really understand this world as a scientist. The question is not how did the world come into existence, but why. So here's the logic. In the beginning, there was one thing, one absolute, self-sustaining, eternal being, whatever you want to call it, a subatomic particle. That was the one thing that existed at the beginning. And from that, everything else evolved. The real question is, why would anything evolve? There's only one thing that exists, and it always existed. Now what? Do you see the problem? So the scientists come up with a theory of a Big Bang. There were two things, and they collided, and that's what started the whole process. But you can't begin with two things. You got to start with one of the two. But if you start with one, it's the end of the story. There was one thing, and it always existed. And then what happened? It exploded? Why would it explode? It started to evolve? Why would it evolve? It's already perfect. You see, you have to ask why, not how. And that's why believing in God is the only thing that makes sense, because belief in God simply means whatever existed for real, whatever, maybe it was a subatomic particle, but it was a subatomic particle that wants something. And because it wants, it created. So what is God? What do we mean when we say God? We mean the original being, whatever that was, that wants something. So if you believe that there was a subatomic particle that wanted to evolve, well, that's God. You can call him subatomic if you want to, but basically that's God. So the only difference between science today and Torah is the question of the original being wants or the original being doesn't know. That's it. So we both believe in God. We both believe in an original substance. The question is only, the original substance knows what he's doing or doesn't know. That's it. So what makes more sense? That this original being evolved because it decided to, or the original being evolved for some unknown reason? See, that's a very good question. But that's a logical question. Because of that question, I believe in the Torah. Because the Torah is basically that being telling us what he decided and why he decided to create the world. So what is the Torah? The Torah is the Creator telling us what he wants. Why does he want it? I don't know. I don't know why I want what I want. There are certain things you want essentially. It's just important to you. Not for some other reason. He's not trying to use this to get to something else. This is what he wants. A world that starts off being ungodly and becomes godly. Sure. And science has figured out a lot of good stuff. And it will continue to figure out stuff. But in the end, it's going to come to the conclusion that the world was created for a reason. But to find out what that reason is, you're going to have to look in the Torah. So that's where science and Torah come together. Science tells you what happened, the Torah tells you why it happened. You're not supposed to believe in a theory. You're supposed to research a theory. You don't believe it. There was this kid in our city in St. Paul. He was hit by a truck, and he was declared brain dead at the hospital. The father said Well, they wanted to take him off of life support. And the father didn't want him to be taken off of life support. The doctor said, but he's brain dead. And the father said, how do you know? How do you know that his brain is not active anymore? And the doctor said, well, we have this machine that measures brain waves, and it's flat. So the father said to the doctor, how old is this machine? When was it invented? And he told him. So the father said, 10 years from now, will they have a better, more sensitive machine than the one we have now? And the doctor said, yeah, probably. So the father said, so you mean the new machine that they're going to develop will pick up more subtle brain waves that this machine can't pick up? And the doctor said, maybe. So the father said, you're declaring my son dead because you have old-fashioned equipment? So you see, in science, there's always going to be an improvement. There's always going to be new discoveries. When the scientist says the world is 16 billion years old, he's talking like a historian, or he's talking like a religion. He should say, honestly, the world appears 16 billion years aged. How long it's been sitting there, I have no idea. I'm not a historian. That's real science. But what people get into should be called scientism, the belief in science. And that's kind of weird, because it's not religion and it's not science. It's not logical and it's not true. It's just dogmatic. So if you talk to a really honest scientist, he would never say, man evolved from a monkey. That's not even a scientific statement. There is some evidence of an evolutionary process. It's not for sure. And if somebody comes up with a better theory, everybody would be happy with it. So if you're talking scientific, you have to be open-minded, not dogmatic. Otherwise, you're not really a scientist. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? You know, I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects. But that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on. If you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat, which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it, you'll like it.